Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another Coffee Chats. We just wrapped up November at Beat Voyage, and we hope many of you had a lovely month, but we also hope that all of you had a safe and a good month in general. I know that it's been a long year for many of us. We're in the last stretch, literally the last month of the year, and we're all here with you in solidarity. Today, we're going to have a brief conversation with Sunghi, who's joining us today. Hi, Sunghi, welcome. And we're going to talk a little bit about our November at Bean Voyage, a few of the things that we've been doing, a few of the things that has been exciting, and we'll talk a bit about something that Sunghi has beautifully written about, storytelling. And so we'll talk a bit about storytelling today. So tune in for that. Sunghi, I kind of want to start in, I think, more broad. So you wrote some really beautiful updates from our month of November. What were one or two updates that has gotten you very excited from November?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the questions and also obviously like for reading through the newsletter really closely. I think the three highlights that I've shared through the newsletter has definitely been something that I have been very excited about. You know, staying up till like 5 a.m. attending some of them has definitely been, I think, kind of like a quick summary of my month because that's how much how much excitement that I was getting from each of the project. And just to quickly highlight, I think the biggest highlight for me personally has been obviously like the launch of the care training with the producers groups that we've started early in November. The past few months we spent I think over 3 months training 10 youth from coffee farming communities, mostly from coffee farming communities, to be a care facilitator individually, like respectively, right? And then they all have been equipped to deliver our training module, and that launched in November. So that's been keeping us really, I think, excited and motivated throughout the month. Obviously, that also means that we are not as involved in running the workshops as we have been in the past. So generally, it means like I wake up to over 200 messages in one WhatsApp group, when there was a session. So there's a live interaction over an hour where the youth facilitator kind of provides games and different materials for the participants to interact. And then they just kind of like dive in and, chat over an hour. And then, my morning time, I wake up to like 5 different groups with 200 messages or more from each of the groups. So that's been really exciting to kind of follow through the whole process of like how we've somewhat handed over the module and like the direct interaction element. But I think we're also obviously keeping in close touch with all of our community partners through some of the field trips that you and Abby and our team in Costa Rica have been leading as well. But definitely that's been something that I think I have been very excited about. And quickly, another update I think is about the storytelling workshop that we have been very grateful to partner with another nonprofit based in the US called Needle and Frame. And there are a collective of artists and filmmakers, and they believe we share really like similar mission to use storytelling as a tool to kind of unite communities and build solidarity, right? And that partnership has also kicked off in November. Obviously, the conversation has been going on for months, but an actual workshop with some of our producers have been kind of starting in November. So that's also been something that we have been really, really excited to follow through. We are giving, in partnership with them, we are giving 5 different producers with the equipment to actually document their own stories and direct, a documentary of their own life and their coffee journey. And it's been really empowering and inspiring to see how they embody that that ownership of their own stories. And we've seen that evolve over the past few years with some of our producers, but it's another step as well to kind of have them now even guide and direct, a documentary that none of us actually have any training on, but the Needle and Frame team is equipped with all the tools and knowledge, and the handing, observing the handing over of the knowledge, and the producer is like really absorbing all of that has been really inspiring to say the least.
It has been indeed. It has been a month filled with so much interesting project development work that I think has been truly wonderful. I think for us to see as well. Talk a bit more about technology and youth. I think you use those two words
Mm-mm.
in the first part of the update when we were talking about care training and how it's kind of handing over almost from how we used to handle or manage trainings ourselves to now kind of these two, in some ways, platforms, tools, you know, to be able to deliver. How is that bringing scalability to the work that we do?
Right, right. I think, yeah, just to kind of give context to whoever is just tuning in to learn about our work, I guess from like 2016 up till earlier this year in 2020, we were running all of our workshops in person, right, in communities, which meant, we'll rent out a place in a community center or in a cooperative, or we'll get sponsored a space, physical space, and we'll be bringing in about 20 to 30 women coffee producers into those classrooms and have a whole day of like lectures and activities so that they're able to kind of learn a new concept and actually implement it through games or different exercises, right? And obviously that was not possible in the context of COVID. And I think even looking forward, we've been kind of thinking about how can we ensure that our impact actually reaches more people. We have been working with around 120 coffee producers, I would say, up till earlier this year. And obviously the depth of the impact was really, really deep. But I think we wanted to also grow the width. The total pie of like our impact is something that we wanted to grow for a while as we were, incubating our idea with the training and the community members. And something that I guess we've been very fortunate to introduce earlier this year, and you've obviously probably have heard about our COVIR, Colaboración Virtual initiative, where we incorporated the WhatsApp element of, turning all of our training materials into something that we can actually share over very accessible and cheap, actually free technology called WhatsApp, right? And if you don't know the pervasiveness of WhatsApp in Latin America, you literally meet, especially in Costa Rica, everyone, even down to like, a 13-year-old in a rural community, knowing how to use WhatsApp, all the way to like, over 60 or 70 years old coffee producers actually knowing how to use WhatsApp. So it's something that we've seen being really accessible to a lot of people in Latin American context, especially in Costa Rica. So we've kind of combined our training materials into like, with WhatsApp. So that kind of ensured the scalability in terms of like how far we can actually reach with the same amount of time that we have, because we no longer are, traveling to the communities, but rather we are managing different WhatsApp groups, right? So that's like, I guess, like the first element of the scalability. But I think looking at more closely at like the sustainability of our project and like how deep our impact can also be sustained while we are scaling our work. I think youth has been something that we've been thinking a lot about for the past few years. And it's, it was like the perfect time for us to kind of introduce that component and invite them to be part of our organization. So last year, thankfully, somewhat coincidentally, we've kind of piloted the idea of like working with youth through our care fellowship program. So we had worked with 13 youth from last year in 2019 to kind of incubate their business ideas. And, and from our perspective, it was also to learn about the whole practice of like working with youth, because it's obviously a whole new territory, right? Like we've only worked with women coffee producers and their context is very different from youth and their perspective about the coffee industry. So that experience really helped us when we had to make that transition this year to kind of ensure the sustainability of our impact and the depth of our work. So youth has been, the 10 care facilitators have been core elements of our care training since earlier this year, where they have been learning, as I was mentioning earlier, our technology and our methodologies and our curriculum to be able to deliver it to their own communities. So I think from our perspective, it's more so of like looking at, this is great component that we've created for the past 4 years, in collaboration with really great thought leaders, and how do we make sure that it doesn't just die when, we just grow or we just disappear or whatsoever. Like, nothing of that will happen. But, we want to really make sure that the work can get continued somewhat, right? And I think the youth have been an important part in that regard, I'll say. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's been a fantastic kind of journey to see because it almost happened unintentionally because of COVID. Um, and also I guess because we ran a fellowship. It was really unintentional that those were going to be combined in that sense. And I think the technology and youth piece are really allowing for some creative scaling up at BV, which has been awesome. Um, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the ask that you had in this week's newsletter before we jump into talking about the stories that inspire. Um, so your ask this week and our ask, I guess, as an organization is around market referrals and connecting with roasters. For anyone who's really new to the BV market platform and our care market program, could you explain like how does it start? What's a typical cycle and how could people kind of be part of that program?
Right. So yeah, so we currently run our training program where our producers get trained to produce, sustainably quality coffee throughout their years, right? That's kind of like bridging the gap in like gender gap when it comes to access to information about the market, but also about farming practices, things that they can implement easily on their farm that would actually give a boost to the quality of their final product. And our end goal is not to end at that training element, because obviously, it's great that you improve your farm practices and you can actually more sustainably grow your plants. But I think the end goal is that they can actually garner more income through the improved practices on their farm, right? And that's where our market component comes in, where we reach out to our market partners, whether they've already worked with us in the past through some network or they're completely new. We build strong network of market partners and then connect them to one of or multiple of smallholder women coffee producers that we work with. We are currently working with over 200 coffee producers, which means there are a lot of lots to sample through, which is our job at Bean Voyage, where starting mid-January, we'll be copying through multiple samples that we receive through from our participating coffee producers. And then from there, we will kind of like make a list of offer that's available for roasters or anyone from around the world to kind of buy in the, I guess like in the form of green coffee, but we also do in limited sense, roasted coffee shipping. Mostly, I think I was gonna, the reason why I said mostly green is because that's the bulk of our sales. Generally, a lot of the roasters prefer to buy in green, where, they will request to receive samples even as early as like in February, and then kind of like go through the whole sampling process up until I'll say last year till April, May. And once that's done, we kind of sign a contract and then organize the shipment. Preferably, we will have all of the contracts somewhat signed by end of March, just to make sure that we can actually secure a ocean freight, right? Like a container, a space in a container, especially if you're not gonna be buying over 200 bags on your own. The chances are we'll have to kind of share a container leaving to a continent or the country that you reside in, so that the cost gets like lower for all of us. And in order to do that actually quite effectively and in our favor, meaning your timeline, we actually have to have the contracts ready hopefully by end of March. Once that's done, the shipment gets sorted out. From our end, we'll sort out the logistics, and we actually share the price breakdown really transparently, all the way down to what's the actual amount that the producers are receiving and what's the amount that we are receiving and how much are we paying our export partner, logistics partner, and everything in between, including the governmental taxes. And those are also divided into two different types right now. So we actually show you the whole breakdown of the price, the price that you are paying, and so you're able to also know how much percentage of that is going directly to producers versus us. And I think this year too, especially during the holiday, we've also worked with organizations that are willing to buy roasted coffee. They are actually farmer roasted in communities. So we actually give, I would say, the majority of the revenue back to the communities that actually produce it, who have been trained to roast their coffee, their own coffee, or they will have their family members roast it as well. So that's also been an interesting, I think, journey. Obviously, it's not in terms of quantity, it's not like as much as how much we trade in green, but that's also an option for people who may not have the access to their a roasting machine or a roasting partner. And for roasted coffee, we can move as a small lot as 5 kilos at a time. So yeah, that's just kind of like a gist of what we do when it comes to market access. But the end goal is to kind of ensure that the majority of the price that the market partners are paying are going back to the communities that produce them.
Yeah. For sure. And I think for folks that are curious to learn more, we're going to put a link in the video, like right on or around the bottom. So do check out the program and do refer us. If it's your favorite coffee shop, roaster, your office, anything really works in terms of partnerships. And we're very creative in finding those ways to partner. So please do reach out, and we're excited for that to grow. And thank you, Sangi, for the hard work that you've done on this over the last couple of years. It's been wonderful. I want to talk a bit about your personal story that you wrote in the newsletter. And for anyone who's watching this video and wondering, what are they talking about? Like, I don't know what this thing is. There's going to be a link to our newsletter on the video. So do check out the link and read the newsletter, because sometimes it may not make complete sense if you just watch the video, because it comes with the newsletter. So just for some context, but Sangi, you wrote about an author that you're quite closely reading, Kennedy, and how the idea of the story and how we started with the single story about 5 years ago now. And I guess many ways those stories evolve every year, and you have stories that you carry forward with you from one year to another, and it has a certain journey of a story. I remember the journey of that story that you talk about, Doña Erika's farm. In fact, last Saturday, we had a training in that exact spot where you and I and a couple of our friends sat there with Doña Erika's family. And they were sharing their skepticism. They were sharing their hopes. They were sharing their fears. Everything kind of opened up. And I remember that was kind of the fueling point. And every time I was in the community last Tuesday and I was driving past that farm, and every time I go through that place, I get a sense of like, kind of like the origin story, right? The origin place. And so I thought what you wrote was really beautiful, and it connected very deeply to me. So thank you for writing that and expressing that. 5 years now. 2020 was a long year. I know that this year you started by visiting a lot of farms. You were traveling quite a bit January and February in farms, and then COVID's happened, and it's caused a huge gap in you being able to actually visit a lot of farms for all of us, really. But considering that, what's been like, is there one or two story from this year, like a conversation, a meeting, a visit maybe from the beginning of the year, that has carried you through this year and that you think you'll take with you to 2021?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was also a really beautiful reflection of like what we've been doing over the past 5 years. And and thank you also for closely reading into my personal note. I obviously, like, looking back at 2020, it's quite crazy to believe that we are already in November, or actually December. We're in the last month. And I remember last year in January, like, we were traveling almost every single day to visit at least one or two farms a day, and for weeks, right? Like, one week after the other, we were just like visiting producers to firstly check on them to see if the harvest was going okay, and kind of doing like the evaluation element, and then also to get to know them a little bit more, as we were still in the middle of our training of 2019, 2020 cohort. So it was kind of like a halfway check-in without really knowing that was going to be the last visit we were going to do until the program ended, right? Like, and then turned into like a virtual one. So it was like I was trying to kind of like think through what really stood out to me. Obviously, there are like multiple stories, but I think one thing that really spoke to me last year, or like earlier this year, was that of Maria and Aline. They are the sisters located in Tarasu, and they have just kind of like recently taken over the farm that their father has been like, running almost independently for the past decades, right? He is one of the first micro mills in the region, and they've obviously had their ups and downs. And more recently, they've been having more of the downs than the ups, as the challenges with climate change, but especially the price crisis have really, really hit them, where they were reducing the amount of coffee that they were processing, and all that. And uncertainties around the contracts has been another big element for them, where when we met them, they were already like these. Even before COVID, they were not actually sold out on their 2019 crops, and they were still sitting as they were like processing the new harvests. The crop, they still had like the majority of what they had processed the year before sitting in their warehouse without really knowing where to sell that. And that's been quite a challenging conversation because, for us too, we are a small organization, it's also not in our, we are not there to kind of like promise them, like false promise them on anything, and we obviously don't want to do that. That's actually against our value, and we try to be as transparent as possible with the whole process and building up the expectations and all that. We actually like stay away from like giving false hope, or like we actually don't do that at all. And we like let them know from the very beginning if there's a sample sent. We actually let them know this is who is receiving the samples and when they're receiving it, and as soon as we get the feedback, we relay the message to kind of like keep that transparency chain, not only for the market partner but also for the producers, right? But I think just like hearing that was kind of a really challenging moment, because they have been running a successful meal for quite some time, a meal that a lot of the community members really looked up to for having started and having been the pioneers in the region. But the reality of it, a few decades later, wasn't that. And they've kind of spoken about, it's maybe the knowledge they have was quite, limited to one element of like, really processing their coffee well, but not really knowing how to manage their financial element, right? Or not even actually knowing much about the market and just contemplating and kind of playing with their feelings rather than data or facts each year. And that's something that they've expressed, like, something that I'm really excited to learn more is how do I, as a new generation coming in, help my dad actually run this farm in a more profitable and sustainable way. And they're like really optimistic sisters and very enthusiastic. And, if you visit them during the harvest, they are the ones that are like in boots and like, covered in like the honey, like, coffee cherry pulp, and like out in the field, in the mill, and just like running around, right? And yeah, I feel like that energy that I got from there, obviously the story, I know a bit more, but I guess like the energy in general that I got from there with like optimism and hope for the future and the dedication and commitment to actually take on their family legacy really have, I think, inspired me for sure. And I think I do mention a lot of, I think oftentimes when people ask me about one inspiring figure in our organization, it's really hard not to mention Doña Erika, because as you were mentioning earlier, she is the one that really fueled the birth of our organization, right? Her family. And I think one thing that along with her and all the other producers, something that we've been more and more realizing throughout the year is that like obviously her entire family is involved with our training, right? Like all of her three daughters are involved in our training in one way or the other. Her second daughter is actually one of our care facilitators. Her youngest daughter like sits in our training sessions kind of sneakily, because she has classes and she didn't want to commit completely on our training session, but like she sits in, and that's something I think has been really keeping me really happy, because it's like like it seems to be having a lot more ripple effects than we imagine. We have spots for, let's say, 200 producers. They can actually attend these workshops, but because right now we are able to integrate the technology element, we actually open that door to a lot more people in their family. you know, we have stories and anecdotes of like producers who sit with their daughters and their sons and actually like watch those videos or watch, you know, listen into the voice notes and like go through the exercises that we provide them together in a family. So when we are actually working with one coffee producer, we actually are not just working with one coffee producers, but we are working with, you know, 3-4 other individuals in their families or their immediate surroundings. And I think knowing that our impact, our work actually reaches a lot more people than we ever imagined in the first place, is I think something that really keeps me excited and going, and you know, keeps me wake up in the middle, like not in the middle of the night, but in the morning to kind of like continue with the work that we do for sure. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing those stories. And yeah, I think both of those stories connect very well for me as well. And I think I feel quite happy to be able to be in this journey where we're able to have these stories that carry us forward. And in many ways, I think that's the, not necessarily the word reward, I would say, but maybe the gift of the work that we do is that you get these kind of, you know, nuggets of stories that you take forward with you for life. It's not just connected to the work you do, it's for life. So thank you for sharing that. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you a bit about our holiday guide. I think we launched our first ever holiday guide this week, and it's in the newsletter. So if you haven't read it, please, we'll probably put all of these links in the video. So do check it out. But Sangeet, tell us about some of your favorite brands and brands that we've featured in the holiday guide.
Right, absolutely. Obviously, like disclaimer here, I was the author behind the holiday gift guide, so obviously they are my favorite friends featured already, kind of like selected. But I think we've, you know, spoken about it, you know, what would we be making our decisions based on, and I think obviously I think a lot of the time it's just assumed that we will be making a decision that's more gender inclusive and gender sensitive and gender equitable and eco-friendly. I think that's kind of like what's been somewhat like a sentiment that's shared among our entire team of like, you know, we will be, you know, if you were to kind of like put one of us in a mall, we would probably be walking towards like one of the most feminist, you know, brands out there that are like rooting for gender equity. So this gift guide was like the very first one that we ever did since the birth of our organization. And we wanted to feature, you know, for your coffee loving friends or family members or your colleagues that, you know, I feel like coffee is like a universal gift that you can actually gift anyone without really knowing a lot about them, you know, the other person. Or if you know that they are a heavy coffee drinker, you know, you want to be giving them like a meaningful bag of coffee this holiday rather than just anything, right? So these are the brands, and we've kind of like divided them geographically, so it's easier and cheaper for you as well if you're trying to get international shipping. I think it can get a little bit tricky over the holiday season, I imagine. So they're kind of like divided by different regions. So there are Europe, Latin America, meaning like Costa Rica, and then North America. And we featured our key partners in each of these regions that we know we have worked with them, and we know that they're out there actually putting their money in the pockets of like coffee producers, and they are out there actually making sure that you know, the gender is something that we actually take into consideration, and gender equity is something that we talk about in the coffee industry as well. So yeah, I'll quickly just name them, I guess, to highlight them. If you're in Europe, please consider buying a bag of coffee from Girls Who Grind Coffee in the UK, or Torréfaction Papillons. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's a French word in France. Those two companies have been incredible partners to work with. And in North America, if you're in Canada, consider the Mellow Coffee Roasters in Toronto, or Jacked Up Chill in Winnipeg. And in New York, we have our trusty partner at Bean and Bean Roasters. And if you're in Costa Rica, you know where to find us. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that's like a quick list of like where we would be buying our coffees from if we were to gift it to our friends.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, you've heard it. We'll have the links down. check these out, and we hope you have a ton of great coffee this holiday season. Just to wrap up, I guess, so this is one of our last kind of coffee chats. We started this in the middle of COVID because we missed having this kind of, like back-to-back conversations back and forth. This is something that we used to do a lot in the previous years, especially when we were together, we were visiting farms. Geographically, that's been difficult, but we're using the limited technology that Zoom has. We've been doing this for the past, I'd say this is our 5th episode, although it might be maybe 4th. But we started it a bit towards the end, but we'd love to hear from you about, how you're enjoying the conversations, if there are things that you'd like for us to talk about. And then our last episode, which for the year, which will be in December, we're going to try to do a very special one. It's going to be right around the New Year's, Christmas time. So we're going to try to do a special episode. So please do stay tuned. It might be a unique Zoom event, live maybe. I don't have ideas, Sangeet. We haven't talked about ideas, but we will come up with something quite different. We might do some question answers about our work. We might, do a quick recap of the year. So there might be a bunch of ideas. But if you have things that you would like for us to talk about in the next episode, kind of wrap up, please do write those in the comment section, and we'll make sure to kind of incorporate that. So with that, I just want to thank Sangeet for having this wonderful conversation, and thank you all for watching and engaging with us today.
Thank you so much, Avi, for your questions as well. And thank you everyone for tuning in again. Thank you.
December. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.